whole world again with a flood. And now today he's going to make a new covenant with a new person, mostly so that he can continue a relationship with us. That's what God wants to keep doing. So far, in confirmation, we've been talking in the book of Genesis about stuff that happened way before history was written down. We have no idea. Remember we talked about God, each of those days may have been 1 billion years. So God, what's 1 billion years to God? He may have taken, God could have made the world in 7 seconds. He could have made it in 7 billion years. So remember, the Bible is a faith book telling us who made the world. Science keeps trying to figure out how God made the world. But all that happened before people were writing about time. Today, for the first time, we're going to meet people who lived in a time of history that we know. Abraham and Sarah, let's say their names, Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah, it's always good to know names. They lived about 4,000 years ago. Around 1800 years BC, Abraham and Sarah were living, walking, real people, living in times when history was written. So we know that Abraham and Sarah were real folks in a historical time. And we're going to talk today about the, what's this word right here? Relationship. That God starts as He begins again with a faith family. Abraham and Sarah are the beginning of our faith family. God decided one day, okay, here's how I'm going to relate to the world. He keeps wanting to be in a relationship. And so He says, I am going to choose one family. I'm going to choose a man and a woman, Abraham and Sarah, and then they're going to have kids, and their kids will have kids, and pretty soon there'll be thousands and thousands of people, and they will form a nation. God said, I'm going to choose you, Abraham and Sarah, of all the people in the world, and I'm going to make you my faith family. Let me hear the word faith family. Faith family. Okay, because Abraham and Sarah are going to be the beginning of our faith family. By the way, they don't start out with the name Abraham and Sarah. They start out with the name Abram and Sarai, and God's going to change their name. And we're going to watch a video in a little bit that tells the whole story about Abram and Sarai and how their name was changed to Abraham, which means father of a bunch of people, and Sarai, which means princess of a big nation. So that's how they became Abraham and Sarah. And they're going to have, God said, you're going to have millions and millions of descendants. You're going to have people coming after you. You're going to be a big nation. And then it's going to get even bigger. You're going to have people throughout the world. And there's going to be a problem with that. And we'll look at the problem a little bit, because the problem is going to be they don't have any kids. So how are they going to have millions of descendants if they don't have any kids? We'll look at that in a little bit. First, I need you to turn in your book, your Here We Stand book. Does everybody have their book?
No.
Are you sitting near a person who has a book? Turn to page 96. 96.
That's too.
Remember, be sure to bring your books each and every week. I tell you what, let's do.
That's
Good. All right. Can you see a book? All right, look up this place, and we'll tell you a little bit more. Oh, we got some extras. Let's get one right here so they can share. Who else needs to share?
They can share one.
Anybody in the back need to share?
Anybody else?
Page 96. As we read through the Bible, and this fall we're reading through the Old Testament, we're looking at the Old Testament stories. As we go through that, we're going to find God keeps making a covenant with people. And so far, you've learned about the covenant with Noah. Look at page 96, number 1, covenant with Noah. Who would read that paragraph for us? Yes, thank you very much.
Because of human evil, God threatened to destroy human life with a great flood, but God repented of the intention and saved humanity and all His creation through Noah and his family. God then entered a covenant with all living creatures and promised never again to destroy life on earth with a flood. A sign of this promise, God put a rainbow in the sky.
Okay, So every time you look at a rainbow, remember the promise of God that He's not going to wipe out the world. Okay? He's not going to do it. He promised not to destroy us. Now, Abraham and Sarah, that's the one we're looking at today. Covenant is made with Abraham and Sarah. You got your daddy and your mama going to be parents of many, many, many millions and millions of people, and God's going to make this covenant. Who would read that paragraph for us? Yes, Miss Cole, would you read that?
God entered into a covenant with Abraham and Sarah so that their descendants would be blessed to be a blessing. God promised that they would have many descendants and that the people would have land to live in. As a sign of this promise, male Hebrew babies are circumcised.
That's a sign that they were of God's people. Here's what I wish I would have done. I wish I would put on the screen that word right there. If you had a pen or a highlighter, I'd say highlight that word, blessed to be a blessing. But could you say it with me? Blessed to be a blessing. And let's say it again. Blessed to be a blessing. Because that's the whole thing. God's going to say, I'm going to bless you, but I'm blessing you so that you are going to be a blessing to other people. So that's the second covenant. We're going to be looking at that second covenant today that He made with Abraham and Sarah, and said, you will be blessed to be a blessing. Our focus today, Abraham and Sarah, the main characters, they're kids who are going to make a mess of things, but God's going to keep His promise. So let's read this paragraph right here together, because this is what we really want to be sure we learn today. Read it together. We can trust God to follow through on promises, even when we don't keep ours. Anybody in here ever broken a promise? Okay. Anybody in here ever had somebody break a promise that they know? Okay. We're not always so good at it, but God will always keep His promises. We can count on that. That's the one thing we can count on. Big question today. Let's read it together. Can I really trust God? Really? All right. I want you to think about, as we go through today, who do you trust? Who do you really trust? Who could you tell things to that you worry about? And can you trust God? And are there times when maybe you have a hard time trusting God? You're not so sure about God. So that's going to be our focus today. All right, Abraham and Sarah, they lived in a land far, far away. And God came to them one day and God said, I want you to pack up all your stuff. And they had lots of stuff because they were, for those days, they were pretty wealthy. They had lots of tents and lots of goats and lots of sheep and cattle. And He said, I want you to move over to this land. And when you get there, it's the land I'm going to promise to you and all your kids and your kids' kids and your kids' kids. And when you get there, it's going to be yours. So they're going to load up and they're going to go about 500 miles. Of course, they don't have cars, they don't have motorcycles, they don't have airplanes. So how are they going to get there? Walk. Mules, camels, whatever they have they can ride on and pull stuff along. So they are going to move. And they're going to run into lots of problems as they go, because Abraham and Sarah, they're good people. They want to try to be holy people. They want to try to obey God, but sometimes they fail. Like Abraham and Sarah, they look around, they say, we don't have any kids. How are we going to have millions of descendants if we don't have any kids? And so they get this idea, there's the maid. Her name is Hagar. If you ever have a kid, there's your name. You can consider naming him Hagar, all right? Great name. I love that name. Hagar. She's the maid. And so they think, aha, Abraham, you hook up with Hagar, y'all can have a kid, and we'll take the kid, and he'll be our kid. And so they do. Abraham and Hagar get together, they do their business, and there's a kid. His name is Ishmael. And God comes and says, no, no, no. I said, Abraham, you and Sarah are going to have a kid. And they're going to do it. Even though they're up in their 90s, they're going to have a kid. When they're 90 years old, they're going to have a kid. And his name is going to be Isaac. He'll grow up and he'll have a kid named Jacob. And you know what? All these folks are not perfect. In fact, they're just little stinkers. They try to obey God, but a lot of times they fail. They try to keep promises, but a lot of times they fail. Now we're going to see a little video about those, but first we need to learn some keywords. And Pastor Rick, who has come from a far, far away country, is going to tell us about some key words that we need to know as we learn the story of Abraham and Sarah and all their family.
Thank you. Speaking of names, one of my favorites, and I've always, from way back, done this, is people have called me PH forever. Because my name's Rick Hartman, and they've called me PH, like Pastor Hartman, you know? Cool. But I've always liked PH.
PH, all right.
So,
PH.
is PH good, everybody?
Yep.
All right. Okay, PH. That's good. That works for me. All right. So I want to tell you that first of all, but let's talk about some of the key words that Pastor Casey talked about here, and one of them is covenant. And I just wonder if you've ever heard that word outside of this classroom. Where have you heard it?
Summer school.
Down Main Street at Zion.
At Zion. Okay. That's good, Eric. Yes, you guys better hear it.
Upstairs.
The rest of you, yeah, upstairs. When do you hear it?
In church.
In church. When in church?
During the sermon?
Well, maybe. I'm not smart enough to use that word during a sermon.
Bread.
Communion.
Communion. This is the new covenant, the new promise, Jesus says. And so covenant is a promise. It's a contract, as it says here, contract or agreement of promises between two parties. So who are the two parties in the story of Abraham and Sarah?
God and Abraham.
God and Abraham, right, or God and Abraham and Sarah. But the covenant is between them all. The one party is Abraham and Sarah, and the other one is God. So they're working together, and that's the promise that is made. They are happy because they are in this covenant with God. And one of the things I wanted to tell you about, that I would share with you about this, and that I've always found kind of interesting about Abraham, is that Abraham must have really had a great relationship with God. All right? Because when you read in the Bible about how Abraham says, Abraham and Sarah find out that they're going to have a baby, right? And Abraham is 100 years old and Sarah is 90, right? Aren't those the ages? You know what Abraham does? He laughs out loud in God's face, holds the sides. You got to be kidding me. That ain't going to work. I'm too old, and so's my wife. And he laughs out loud at God. And my feeling is you got to have a pretty good covenant with somebody like that to be able to laugh with somebody like that. Because you sometimes are afraid to say anything, but when you have that relationship with God like that, you can laugh out loud and hold your sides and say, "Oh, you're nuts, man." Have you ever said that to God?
Yeah.
You probably need to sometimes, right? Or feel like you need to. That's what Abraham did. He said, there's no way that's going to happen. And so what does he do? He names his son, Isaac, for what he did, which was laugh. They laughed at God, and Sarah got pregnant. All right? Watch me laugh at it. All right? The second word is trust. And trust is believing and relying on others. And if you trust God, what would you say you have in God?
Trust.
You have trust in God, though. What's another word for it? I'm sorry.
Covenant.
What's another word?
Relationship.
I believe.
God.
In God the Father.
Relationship.
Yeah, that's a statement of
Feeling.
Belief.
trust and
Feeling.
Faith.
begins with an F. Faith. Yeah, it's a statement of faith. So when you trust God, you have faith in God. Abraham trusted God and relied on God and knew that God would take care of him, believed that. So that's the word trust, a faith relationship. And if you trust somebody, you have faith that they'll carry through. There are broken promises, right? We talked about that. But faith is trusting that this will happen.